So we're joined now by Shona Robison. Shona, thank you for joining us.
Pleasure.
So how is your conference going so far?
Really well, really busy. It's a fantastic venue, and it just again reminds you of the size that conference now is compared to the old days, and really great to see so many people, all ages, all walks of life, and yeah, I've had quite a few different fringe events, and just taking the flavour of conference in the hall. It's good atmosphere.
It's funny that I haven't been to conference since I went with my dad back in about 1990, and that was in the Albert Halls in Stirling. There's under 1,000 people there, and I look at this, and it's it's a whole different scale of thing. I mean, the party has become so much bigger in the last few years. So you had a fringe event of your own last night.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell us a wee bit about what was going on there?
So last year's conference, Nicola announced the establishment of the Social Justice Commission, which was following on from the Sustainable Growth Commission. So the Sustainable Growth Commission was talking about the economics of independence, how we create wealth. The Social Justice Commission is about what do we do with that wealth to create a more socially just Scotland, and to narrow the gap between the richest and the poorest, and to create a fairer Scotland. So it's actually the reason that most of us joined the SNP in the first place, and why we support independence. But sometimes you get so caught up with detail that you don't actually get the chance to take a step back and think about what did we come into this for. And so it's a great honour to be able to chair the commission and have a great group of people around the table, including people like former Chief Medical Officer Harry Burns, people like Aileen Campbell, and others who are bringing a wealth of experience to look at how do we, with the powers of independence, set out a route map to how we would create a more socially just Scotland. So we had our first meeting on Friday, and we had a fringe meeting last night, which was very, very successful.
And so is the goal of this is to develop policy then?
So it's to develop a route map of what would the priorities be. So in the first 5, 10, 15, 20 years, what does the evidence tell us that would be the right things to do using Scotland's wealth to create a more socially just Scotland? Now, you could, there'll be things that will take a bit longer to do, but there'll be things that we could do more quickly. And what would those things be? What would the priorities be? What are the first things you would do with all of those powers? Because I know that the Scottish Government, and I've been a government minister myself, sometimes very frustrating that you don't have all the tools in the box. You've got half of them, you don't have the other half. So what would we do with that full toolbox, and what would the priorities be? And we're looking at international evidence, obviously building on some of the work the Scottish Government's done, looking at things like New Zealand, for example, where they're going to measure the success of the nation, not just through growth of GDP, but about well-being and closing that gap. Those should be measurements of a successful nation and a successful economy. So looking beyond the traditional measurements, and it's very exciting. And Harry Burns is great because he's already said, I've got lots of research papers on this that he's going to bring to the commission, and we're not starting with a blank sheet of paper, but we have some great minds around that table.
So you've said that this is obviously you're looking forward towards the what can be done with the full powers of independence. How much of what you're talking about are things that the Scottish Government can start work on right away?
Well, obviously the Scottish Government is doing a lot. So whether it's around social housing and the commitment to 50,000 social houses, or whether it's around things like the welfare fund, trying to mitigate against some of the rather draconian welfare policies of the UK government, or things like the child payment, which is obviously there's a debate on that tomorrow. The fact that it's about making sure we get money into the hands families that need it. All of these things are important, but they're only mitigation against a system that creates inequality and actually has driven the divide between rich and poor even wider. So we can mitigate forever, but actually having the powers ourselves to create a fair, inclusive, dignified welfare system, and I guess coming at it from a point of view, with independence, it's about our collective pot. So we all contribute into that collective pot, because we don't know when we'll draw upon it, whether we draw upon it in using the NHS, or our children using the education system, or our elderly parents using the care system, or indeed when you need it, to have that support through the welfare system, and to look at that as an entitlement and right, rather than the undeserving and deserving poor that has crept into the rhetoric of the UK government. So the chance to take a step back and think, what kind of society do we want to create, and to set that vision out, to help persuade people that come the next independence referendum, that actually this is a vision for a much better society.
And are there any kind of guide rails that you're on, or is this commission able to recommend anything it wants?
So we will build on the work of the Sustainable Growth Commission. I reread the Commission's recommendation, and the Growth Commission actually talked quite a lot about the cost of inequality and the need for us to look beyond GDP. So a lot of their recommendations were in the right space as well, and it's about taking that, about the projection of revenues, taking that as a starting point, but then to build on that and to say, okay, so within that first period of independence, it's not going to be the land of milk and honey. So on day one of independence, you know, the sun's not going to shine every day. We will have to prioritise, we will have to make choices. Some of those might be quite difficult choices, but it gives us the opportunity to set out the building of a fairer nation and the steps that we would want to take, and what those early priorities will be. So it will be credible, it will be achievable, but I think it will be inspirational as well.
And without obviously wishing to preempt what the Commission might say, because obviously you've only just started meeting, what are your personal kind of feelings? What do you think are the first things that you would want to be on the agenda?
So for me, you know, it's critically important that we provide opportunity and hope for people. I think that is, if you were to ask people who are living day to day, kind of, you know, hand to mouth in their existence, that it's the lack of hope that is actually the most difficult thing. So I think to be able to give people hope that they will be able to get employment, that their children will be able to get employment, but also that there will be a security around them that supports people who, for whatever reason, need that support, and that is the collective societal bond that we all have, rather than the concept of you know, there's no such thing as society, and you know, there's undeserving and deserving poor. This will be a very different outlook, and the policies and things that we will do within that will have that flavour. It's interesting when you look at Scandinavia, for example, that no matter what government has been in power, it's maybe changed a bit over recent years, but traditionally, no matter what government was in power in the Scandinavian countries, it was all within the same parameters of what we accept, or the principles of this type of society we want to live in, and all of the parties within those debates were within those parameters. I think that's where we could get to with an independent Scotland, that no matter who's in power, it's still about those principles of fairness, of opportunity, of dignity, that we would all accept and work within, and I like that idea. So we'll bring forward specific policies that the Commission will debate and look at, that will, if you like, set out to achieve that vision of our nation.
And when you talk about that idea of having a kind of consensus about the vision for the country, I mean, we know that in the UK, for example, it's very difficult for any party to say that they oppose the NHS, for example. That's a kind of thing that everybody sort of agrees should exist and everybody supports. How do you think you can build that consensus? Are there other parties engaged in the Commission, for example?
So although the Commission has been set up under the auspices of, it was an SNP announcement obviously by Nicola, and the Secretariat's been provided by the SNP. We do have people on it that are not SNP. Now obviously they accept the premise that independence is the best state of affairs for Scotland going forward, but they're not all SNP. So So we have people who are of no party, and we have people who may support other parties. And what is important though is that they accept that actually independence can create the opportunity. And let me give you one example of where I think we can create a different narrative. If you look at the narrative around immigration and the position of migrants coming to Scotland, the Scottish Government stands out very differently from the rest of not just the UK but other parts of Europe, where the narrative is about othering people. And I've had people here in Scotland saying to me, who I had just the other day, someone of Polish descent and someone of Italian descent, whose surnames are Polish and Italian, who have been getting stick. After all the decades of living here, for the first time they've been getting abuse because of the whole Brexit narrative, the Trumpism of politics that creates this idea of people are other. And I think with independence we can really push back on that and create a society where we are explicit about being welcoming to people from elsewhere, that we want to have people coming here who want to work and build their lives here, raise families here. And what a different, great narrative that would be. Not just the narrative, but the policy to follow that, so that it would be a fair immigration policy that we could have here in an independent Scotland, rather than the policy that we see, unfortunately, emanating from the UK government.
Just on that note, we've had a bit of discussion. There was an article in the National at the weekend by one of friends of the channel, Ellen Hofer, talking about the status of EU citizens in Scotland just now. What do you think the Scottish Government can and should be doing to support those EU citizens whose status is under really serious threat at the moment?
So Mike Russell's talked a bit about this, about how we can protect the rights of EU citizens here. He's talked about us opposing the UK government's rhetoric. They're talking about deporting EU citizens who have lived here potentially for decades. Now, we've supported a lot of people in terms of the right to remain, and obviously I've supported a lot of my own constituents in trying to help them through the process of that. But the idea that anybody, whether or not they miss the process or finds themselves in a position of being removed, is just something that's intolerable. So what Mike Russell has been saying is the Scottish Government will stand with EU citizens and oppose any attempts to try and remove people from the country. Now, clearly, what that ends up looking like in terms of support for people, I think remains to be seen. But I think sending that message out has been very important. That that is something that we just won't tolerate as a government and as a society.
And just finally, I unfortunately have to ask you a wee bit about Brexit. What's your feeling on where we're going to be over the next couple of weeks?
Hard to tell, isn't it? I mean, with the Queen's speech, goodness knows, it is a position that changes on a daily basis. On the one hand, Boris Johnson talks about getting a deal, and then you have the information coming out from EU leaders that looks unlikely. Whether or not that deal then gets through Parliament, if there is even a deal, or whether we end up in the nightmare of a no-deal Brexit. I think all of that just says to the Scottish people, these are your two futures facing you. One is this, increasingly right-wing, unelected, unaccountable, law-breaking Tory government that looks anything but strong and stable, or there is a future where we take control into our own hands and make our own decisions. And I think compared to when you look back to 2014, where independence was portrayed as this risky option and against a strong and stable UK, how different things have changed now, where actually the remaining in the UK looks anything but strong and stable, and actually looks in many ways the riskier option. And our EU citizens who were told the only way to remain in the EU was to vote no, what a different scenario that will be for them. And I know many of them now support independence for Scotland because of the mistruths that we're told. So I think we are desperately worried, obviously, about the economy for Scotland. and we absolutely need to make sure that going forward we protect jobs here in Scotland, and Mike Russell and the Scottish Government have set out a number of mitigating steps that they'll take. But ultimately, we have to take control back into our own hands in terms of our destiny and being able to make our own choices and not end up being dragged out of an institution that we didn't vote to come out of. That would be absolutely against the democratic wishes of the Scottish people. And speaking to people who made a different decision back in 2014, many of them now, because of all these things that have happened and because of Brexit, have a very different opinion now than they might have had back in 2014.
Well, Shona Robison, thank you very much for joining us, and all the best with the Social Justice Commission.
Thank you.
Thank you. We're joined by Thomas Carruthers now from Project Heather. So, Thomas, first of all, tell us, what is Project Heather?
Good question. So, Project Heather is the project of opening, or I should say reopening, the Scottish Stock Exchange.
Okay, and what's the goal of that then? Why does Scotland need its own stock exchange?
A number of reasons. There were stock exchanges in Scotland before. The Glasgow and Edinburgh stock exchanges were founded in 1844, 45, Aberdeen, Dundee, slightly later. Greenock stock exchange is the last of the five, opened in 1888, and they enabled the wealth of Scotland to back Scottish enterprise, Scottish entrepreneurialism, and Scottish industry. Now, they were closed in 1964, and a new Scottish Stock Exchange was created that had the securities lists of Aberdeen, Dundee and Edinburgh, and of course that was based in Glasgow. Mm-hmm. And that in itself was closed in 1973, and the securities lists of all of the Scottish Stock Exchanges went to London, where they remain. We believe that a new Scottish Stock Exchange would act to provide capital to Scottish entrepreneurs and Scottish businesses in a way that doesn't currently happen. But we also think a new Scottish Stock Exchange could do more. It could allocate capital to businesses which are purpose-driven and which are trying to achieve an impact on society and on environment, as well as profit for shareholders.
So this would be kind of like for community interest companies then, do you think, or just private limited companies that would just have a social goal as well?
It can be for companies that have got a measurable social purpose. So you can't just say that you're going to do good in the world. That's not adequate. That's what's called greenwashing or social washing. You'd have to be able to give evidence to our admissions panel that you're intending to do it and that you could do it and that you were doing it. But it's also for bond issuers. So you could issue a fixed income instrument, a bond, and the proceeds of that bond can be applied to socially and environmentally positive purposes. We forget about it because in Scotland most people borrow from banks, but in fact most companies borrow from the bond market. So bond issuance is an important thing. Green bonds we've all heard of. Wouldn't it be great if Scotland issued green bond? And of course bonds that can apply capital to improvements for social infrastructure, or another thing. Finally, investment trusts or funds. So the investment trust was invented in Scotland. It was invented in Dundee in 1879 by a man called Robert Fleming, who went on to found a big asset management company, but was obviously more importantly the grandfather of a man called Ian Fleming, who wrote the James Bond books. And the closed-ended fund limited by shares is a fantastic way of allocating capital on a thematic or a social basis. So you could have an investment trust that was just investing in projects for the elderly, and you could have another one investing just in taking plastic out of the supply chain. You could have one investing its proceeds just in regenerative agriculture. You could have one that's just investing in female entrepreneurship. All sorts of ways you could allocate capital that way. And of course these trusts are also listed on the market.
So what led to this process? How did you come to be involved in this work?
So I founded a stockbroking firm called Interactive Investor, which still trades and is one of the largest stockbrokers in the UK. And I traded that company through 2008, and it became very clear through 2008-09 that a lot of bad things have been going on. And the financial services sector that I thought I understood, I didn't understand at all. And that really woke me up to the need for new financial structures and new financial intermediaries. And when I looked around at what was possible for social purpose companies and for environmental purpose companies, it seemed very difficult for them to raise capital. I mean, the structures weren't there. And hence the idea of a new stock exchange that would provide them with the infrastructure for them to list their companies and raise capital, but preserve their social purpose. The last thing in the world you want to do is create a infrastructure which means that the social entrepreneur gives up the reason why they came to found an organization as the price of raising capital. So the exchange is about finding like-minded investors as well as socially minded entrepreneurship. And Scotland, well, I grew up here, and there's a clear access to capital problem for conventional Scottish businesses as well. And I believe that a new stock exchange would enable all sorts of businesses to be able to scale up and not just grow in scale, in size, but operate more efficiently. We have to address the productivity issues, and I firmly believe also we have to address the issue of entrepreneurship. There aren't enough female entrepreneurs, and there's got to be a reason why systematically we aren't seeing more women coming forward and founding businesses. Private equity is not a very good way of backing female entrepreneurship. In fact, the record shows that 1% of all the private equity ever raised since the asset class was created in about 1970, 73, has been invested in businesses led by women or founded by women.
That's really extraordinary.
1%. 2% in businesses created by people of colour. So we have a massive issue if we think private equity is the way to capitalise these sorts of businesses. We need to find a way to do it, and I'm convinced that's a public market.
Okay. And so who else is involved in this project?
We have a small team, but the executive team comes from a wide range of different Scottish businesses. We have great advisors. Momentous Change wrote the original report a year ago on the business case for a Scottish Stock Exchange. The Scottish Government has given us regional selective assistance for training and qualifying highly skilled people. So we've had good support. And of course, from the advisory community as well. The Exchange depends on being able to get the Scottish advisory community on side and see it as an opportunity for them to do public market work.
And now you've been working on this for a few years now. What stage are you at? How close are we to getting this exchange opened?
So we partnered with Euronext, which is the #1 European stock exchange platform. It was created by the merger of the stock exchanges of France and Netherlands and Belgium in the year 2000, and it now also includes the exchanges of Portugal and the Republic of Ireland. And so it has a federal model, which is great because it means Scotland fits very well as a new platform. And Euronext itself has just launched a new technology platform, which is the one that we'll be using for the Scottish Stock Exchange. We are in the build and test process now. In fact, we've completed the building of it. We're in the testing process now. So we are quite close to being able to go live.
Okay. And so would this be strictly a digital thing, or will there actually be a physical stock exchange building that we could go to?
Yes, so we've taken a lease of 39 George Street in Edinburgh. So there is a physical building that people can go to, and we will welcome people coming in. Stock exchanges are called public markets for a reason. They're supposed to be open to the public. But the trading itself will not be done by men in waistcoats wearing bowler hats and writing prices on blackboards with chalk.
Yeah.
That's all in the cloud now.
Okay. So what is the development of this look like then? I mean, how quickly are you expecting to have companies able to access capital through this market?
Well, one of the advantages of the Optic platform and the technology partnership with Euronext is that there are already a lot of investment institutions and banks connected to Optic. So on the first day of trading with the Scottish Stock Exchange, we'll have more than 1,000 what we call in industry buy-side connections, people who are capable of buying securities connected to the platform. So that's a positive thing.
And do you have, are there companies that you know of that are keen to get involved?
Yes, there are, and some of them are not in Scotland. We have international interest in being able to use the market because of this demand to go beyond simply the listing requirements, but demonstrate a positive impact through the operation of the business as well.
And are there any other markets anywhere else in Europe or around the world that have this kind of social mission embedded in them?
No. But there are great crowdfunding businesses that we completely support that do it for smaller sums of money. So there's a Dutch bank called Triodos, which also has an English branch in Bristol, and Triodos also helps to finance social purpose businesses and ethical businesses. There's another site, crowdfunding site called FX, ETHEX, based in Oxford, which also does this very well, especially for community energy schemes. So there are great platforms out there, but we want to go one beyond that and actually have a public market.
That's excellent. So we should be looking forward to seeing something. I mean, do you have a date in mind when we can look forward to it?
Well, it's not completely under my control. We have 9 work streams to deliver this.
Okay.
But the final decision will be taken by the regulator, which is the Financial Conduct Authority.
Mm-hmm. And are you confident that should be okay?
Well, I'm not allowed to comment on my relationship with the regulator,
Okay.
but so far so good.
Okay, well, Thomas, thank you very much. It does sound like a fascinating project, and we're very glad that you could be here to talk about it. So thank you.
Thank you for the invitation to speak.
So we're joined now by Delyth Jewell of Plaid, the Assembly Member for South Wales East and Shadow Minister for International Affairs, Culture and the Future, which might be the coolest job title in the world. and by Jordan Linden, who's the Deputy SNP Group Leader in North Lanarkshire Council and also Vice Convener of YSI. Yeah. So thank you both very much for joining us. Now, Della, first of all, you've just spoken on the conference floor, giving the fraternal address that Plaid members often give at SNP conference. How did you feel that was received? How was the crowd?
I was very pleased with the reception I was given. I mean, the links between Plaid Cymru and the SNP are obviously very strong. We're sister parties, and it's my first opportunity to actually be in an SNP conference and my first time in Aberdeen. So this is a day of firsts for me, and I couldn't be more delighted.
Well, it's your first time on broadcast in Scotland as
yes.
well, so you've really reached the pinnacle now. So what message was it you were bringing? Unfortunately, I didn't get to hear the speech. So what was it you were saying?
So I, as part of the International Affairs portfolio, I cover Brexit. So I was talking about how, at first, looking at how Brexit is getting people to see that we need to have an alternative, that the Westminster system is broken beyond repair, and also looking towards independence, at how there's been a surge in support for independence in Wales the past few months, looking at why that is, and the fact that we don't want independence just because the principle is important. We want independence because we want to improve the lives of the people that we represent, the lives of people living in our communities, and rooting all of that in our values. And I also got a chance to quote Winnie Ewing, which is always something that I love to do.
Yeah, so as you said, the independence movement in Wales really seems to have had a bit of explosive growth recently. What do you put that down to?
I think it's down to a number of factors. I think that we are living in extraordinary times, and like I say, I don't think it's all because of Brexit, but I think that I think what Brexit has done is it's exposed inherent problems in the Westminster system. I think that those problems existed already, and people did know it, but this has really brought that to the fore in a way that people cannot ignore anymore. And so I think that it is partly spurred on by the way in which Wales is being treated very badly by the Westminster system. I think Brexit has been it started the firing gun, but the track, if I can extend the metaphor, the track was already laid long ago. So I think that it's partly because of the time that we're living in, and also because people are looking for something to be hopeful about. People are looking for something that is a positive alternative. And one of the things which has marked these marches for independence that we've been having, and thousands of people have been coming to them in Wales, and that's a new thing for us in Wales. The thing which has marked them for me is that we are not used to having marches in favour of something. We're used to seeing marches when people are against and protesting things. This is something where people are saying, you know what, we see an alternative that is exciting and it's dynamic, and we want to show our optimism and our hope for that. So that's why I think the more people see of that positive movement, they want to be a part of it, and that's why the ranks of the indie curious are growing.
Okay. Now, Jordan, you're the Vice Convener of YSI and a councillor, so you're kind of seeing two different things. You're seeing kind of some of the old machinery of North Lanarkshire Council, which not always the most efficient or kind of forward-thinking of organisations. Meanwhile, you're part of YSI, which does very little but look to the future. So what do you see for the independence movement in Scotland just now, as compared to, say, what's happening in Wales?
I think it's really interesting to hear Jelith talk about the sort of the marches and that growth, because that's still happening in Scotland right now. People, I think, thought after the 2014 referendum that was the question dead and buried, and I think that since the 2015 general election we've seen that that's not the case. People are not going to just get back in their box, which is what was expected, and we saw that continue, that growth, particularly around All Under One Banner, and those rallies continuing right across the country, recognising that actually Glasgow and Edinburgh is just not enough. The small towns and villages need to hear that message as well, and I think that growth of the message is what's slowly but surely convincing people, obviously against the backdrop of Brexit, Britain and Boris Johnson, and that the growth of the message being spread right across the country and having those conversations and that dialogue. I think that's one of the great similarities I can see between us and Wales around the growth of their independence movement as well, is that those grassroots conversations are happening, and that we won't be getting back in our box, and we won't be being told what to do, which is exactly what's happening in terms of the Westminster system. We are fundamentally flawed.
And North Lanarkshire, of course, in 2014 was one of the Yes authorities. It did come up fairly positive. So you're starting from a better base than a lot of areas. How do you feel the independence movement is growing in North Lanarkshire?
I mean, I think the first thing to say is that I think that the sort of cabal between the Conservatives and Labour has continued. I mean, ultimately the cabal between the Conservatives and Labour and the kind of pro-unionist message was one of the things I think that put people off the No campaign in 2014 in North Lanarkshire, because it wasn't a positive campaign. It was very negative. It was about what Scotland couldn't do rather than what Scotland can do. The Yes campaign ignited something in people who had felt disengaged for such a long time. People like my mother, who said to me, I'm not interested in politics, I've never voted in my life, said to me, I'm going to go to the polling station and vote with you, I'm going to vote yes, because anything's better than this. And I think that we see that continuing at the moment in North Lanarkshire. We have a Labour minority administration, which is in power, supported by 8 Tories in an informal coalition, although they don't want to call it coalition. And I think that the kind of direction of travel that they continue to pursue continues to bring people over to the Yes campaign, because down the SNP all the time, they down our desire to be an independent country. And I think that people are absolutely fed up of being told, no, you're no good enough to be independent. But also, people are fed up of being told just to suck it and see with Boris Johnson and Brexit. The fact that we've just to sit back and allow our country to be ripped out of the European Union, and Scotland didn't vote for it, North Lanarkshire certainly didn't vote for it, North Lanarkshire voted yes, and one of the things we're told is that we vote no, we would leave the European Union. People voted no, and now we're leaving anyway. So I think folk are just scurried with the lies, and just want something positive. They want to take that mantle and run with it and just be an independent country. It's normal for every other country in the world. Why is it not normal for us? I think that people are slowly but surely asking that question of themselves when what they're being offered is Brexit Britain, Boris Johnson, and Scotland being ignored time and time again.
Now, Delith, as Jordan said there, the No campaign in 2014 was a joint effort by Labour, the Tories, Lib Dems, and occasional stragglers from other slightly more extreme organisations. Do you find the same thing happening? Clearly there hasn't been an organised anti-independence campaign in Wales, but do you get the feeling that Labour and the Tories are lining up against you?
One of the interesting things that's happened in recent months is that the Labour Party in Wales have been forced to concede that, especially if Scotland were to become independent, then it would only make sense for Wales to reconsider its position in the Union. I mean, and the First Minister of Wales, Labour First Minister, has conceded that. So I think that there is a tension between what the pragmatism of the Welsh Labour Party and the UK Labour Party. But of course, policy, even if it is different, the Welsh Labour MPs will follow the Jeremy Corbyn whip, and so that they're not going to be standing on a different manifesto. So as much as I have been very heartened to see that recognition from the Labour Party in Wales, until the UK Labour Party will follow suit and recognise that, I will continue to be disheartened.
I mean, we've seen a lot of Labour voters move over to the SNP, and basically as a result of the referendum in 2014, that was a big shift that happened. And Labour have been on kind of a downslide ever since. Do you get the feeling that Labour may have learnt lessons from what happened here, and might be a bit more open to the idea of independence because of that? Or do you think that they're as Labour are sometimes want to do, just not learn from their own mistakes and plough on with the same strategy?
Well, I think that I think it might be a little bit of the two. I mean, in terms of the vow that happened in 2014, I think that the unionist parties, people saw through the cynicism of what happened there, and the fact that promises were made that were immediately broken. Now, that is something which the parties, of course, should learn from, and I think that, again, there's I think that there is a movement from the Welsh Labour Party. There's a group within the Welsh Labour movement that support independence. I think that, so Jordan was talking about all under one banner. I think that it's a really positive thing that in Wales as well, that there are groups like Yes Cymru that mean that this is not a movement which belongs to just political parties. Political parties play a central role in this, and Plaid Cymru will always be the party of independence. We are the party of Wales. But I welcome people from all parties and none who support the idea of looking towards independence. This is something which should transcend party boundaries, but as I say, at the moment, even when we get warm words in part from the Welsh Labour Party, it usually is met with having to row back. So one step forward and two steps back. So I mean, it's moving in the right direction, but I'd like to see more movement from them. And the Conservatives, surprise in Wales, know that they are very much not in that place at all.
And as we look ahead, there's a fairly strong likelihood of a general election sometime fairly soon. What's Plaid's kind of outlook for that? How are the polls looking? What kind of responses are you getting on the doors just now?
Well, we've just had an incredibly successful European election, and we have also topped the poll for both the regional list and constituencies for our next Assembly election. Now, we welcome the idea of there being a general election, but at the moment I have to say that for Plaid Cymru, our main concern is stopping a disastrous no-deal Brexit, and so we would want a second referendum to happen before any general election. But in terms of when that general election does come, I think we're in a really good and very strong position.
And looking just a little bit further ahead to any Assembly elections, you said your polls where you're on top for those?
We have been on top for the first time in the history of our party. So polls are suggesting that Plaid Cymru will be in pole position then, no pun intended, to win the next Assembly election.
And if you were to win, I mean, would it be like with the SNP, where as soon as a majority was achieved in Parliament, job one was getting a referendum on independence? Is Plaid on the same track?
I certainly think that within the next decade we would want to have a referendum, possibly before. I mean, we have been in a very different place from Scotland, but, and there's a big but there, in recent months things have shifted so much, and public opinion has really moved towards, like I say, indie curiosity, if that's a phrase. I have been thinking that within certainly the next 10 years we would look to be, I think we could well be an independent nation. I think that could even happen before.
And Jordan, more or less the same question to you. We know the SNP is doing well in most of the polls. There's a suspicion that it's possible to do a clean sweep. What kind of feeling have you been getting on the doors about a general election?
Yeah, so I think that for us, the issue of a general election, the key backdrop is Brexit, and that difference between, the offering, the SNP will offer, being stronger for Scotland, standing up for Scotland, make sure Scotland's voice is heard against the backdrop of Boris Johnson's Brexit, and obviously the question of independence and the redetermination of our direction of travel. In terms of what I get on the doors, I get people being fed up, people who I think possibly fed up with elections, first of all, but secondly absolutely just fed up of Boris, fed up of hearing about Brexit, fed up about talking about Brexit. People ask me when you're going to start talking about the real issues, and that reminder that actually whilst the focus is on Brexit, whilst the focus is on Boris, they actually have a functioning SNP Scottish Government that are working day in and day out for people in Scotland. But at the same time also our Westminster team are fighting what is going on down there, and frankly a lot of people don't know what's going on down there. I don't think even Boris knows what's going on down there.
I'm not sure anyone really knows what's going on.
So I think that's really what our backdrop and our message is going to be. I think it's quite clear, it's interesting that Delph talks about, the kind of ordering of when we have a general election. I think that clearly the SNP are working with colleagues in Westminster who are like-minded around stopping Brexit. I think that's absolutely to be welcomed. It's the right course of action. Ian Blackford and the team have been putting in a stellar job dealing with our colleagues and our friends. I think that we obviously, the priority is stopping no-deal Brexit on the 31st of October, and thereafter looking at how as soon as possible we can get Boris Johnson and his hands away from the keys of number 10 Downing Street, and obviously continuing to make sure that we campaign to stay in the European Union. We are very proud to be part of the European Union, and we do everything to stop that.
And sorry, just to change tack a little bit, staying in Europe though, we spoke yesterday to Valentina from YSI and also to Lorena from EFA, and today we heard the sentencing for the Catalan politicians who were charged and tried over holding their own independence referendum 2 years ago. What's your immediate reaction to these sentences that have been handed down?
Horror. I'm utterly appalled by it. They were delivering a democratic mandate. I think that it really is shameful what's happened, and I mean I know that from everything that's been happening today in the conference that the SNP, like Cymru, are sending solidarity to those in Catalonia about this, but I think that the European Union does need to take more of a stand on this, because again this is about democracy, and I really think that what we are seeing here is a very dark day for democracy.
And obviously I've mentioned that we have just in the conference hall here at SNP Conference passed a resolution. I was delighted to second it, although I wouldn't have liked to have had to do it, a resolution on the Catalan political prisoner situation. I was there on the 1st of October in Catalonia in 2017. I remember the absolute fear that people had around the process being disrupted by the Spanish state and the police, and I saw the brutality as well. And it seems abhorrent and tragic that 2 years on, people who have delivered this democratic referendum's opportunity to express the right to self-determination have been pursued, have been put through the court system. Carme Forcadell, the Parliament former president, she's just received 11.5 years for facilitating a debate on independence. That's the reality, and that's in 2019 in the European Union. I've just spoken about the fact I'm a very proud European. I'm just back from Brussels, where we're focused on, at the Committee of the Regions, we focused on cohesion policy, collaboration, working together, a Europe of the peoples. And then I come back to that, and I come back to the European Commission's response, which is that they have no comment to make, other than that it's entirely constitutional in Spain. That's appalling. Yeah. And as leaders in Europe, we should be saying that's appalling as well. Absolutely sending solidarity to people who are going to, people like the Geordies who has just had their first son whilst they're in prison, and they're not going to see those first steps. I think it's shameful.
Yeah, well, personally, and I think probably on behalf of Broadcasting Scotland, I can say we absolutely agree. It is an outrage that the politicians should be locked up, especially in the conditions that they've had to face, just for trying to have a debate and have a vote on something. So thank you both very much for joining us, Delph. I do hope you're enjoying Aberdeen. I do hope you get a chance to enjoy maybe the karaoke tonight with Jordan.
Yes.
She's already been signed up.
I will be singing.
Well,
might be a duet actually. Who knows?
If I do make it along myself, I'll look forward to hearing you. So thank you both for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
So we're joined now by Dr. Catherine Trebeck, who's the Knowledge and Policy Lead for the Wellbeing Alliance.
Wellbeing Economy Alliance.
Wellbeing Economy Alliance, I'm sorry. So first of all then, I guess the obvious question is, what is a wellbeing economy?
So it's one that is directed and designed in a way to deliver social justice and environmental health. It turns the tables on our current economic system, where so many times we see the environment and communities in service of just faster economic growth. The idea of a wellbeing economy is saying, hang on a minute, we need to flip that on its head and have economic activity designed in a way that meets the need of people and planet. So it's about fundamental repurposing of the economy so it delivers better lives for people and does so in a sustainable way.
Now, some people are going to hear that and think, this sounds pretty radical. How can the market serve anything other than capital efficiency? That seems like what markets are just there to do. So how does an economy work if making money isn't the goal?
Well, it depends what you're making money for and how you're making money and how the markets are designed. So there are plenty of examples where we've got businesses who are
working in the marketplace, selling and exchanging things and buying things and hiring people and paying taxes and paying incomes and so on, doing normal sort of everyday economic activity, but they're doing so for a different purpose than solely to extract profit and send it off to shareholders. So many companies are designed just to get short-term profit and siphon it up to the shareholder owners. But what's really exciting is we're seeing a whole lot of plethora of different business models. We're saying we can still be businesses, we can still engage in market activity, but do so for a different purpose. And so they might not even call it profit, they might call it a surplus that they then reinvest in the business, or that they undertake some socially beneficial activity, or they're delivering environmental sustainable services. So it's about repurposing again, saying how are we making this money, what are we doing with it, and who's getting the benefit of it, and asking those really basic questions that so often, to be honest, we've been told, you know, we're not allowed to ask that, or to ask that is heretical or too radical, as you've suggested. But actually, it's when at a time and an era where young people are terrified for their future, where the scientists are getting louder and louder about the economic system and the growth-orientated model being the root cause of environmental breakdown, to think that we can carry on as business as usual, that to me is the ultimate naivety. And so time to allow ourselves to ask these questions is well beyond.
Okay, so Scotland, Iceland, and especially New Zealand, New Zealand especially has been in the news recently. They've just produced what I believe is their first wellbeing economy budget. So what does that look like? I mean, how does a country go about becoming a wellbeing economy country?
So what's exciting about what Iceland, Scotland and New Zealand are doing is they've got a collaboration called the Wellbeing Economy Governments Partnership, WeGo for short, and they're saying we want to learn from each other. None of us have got this cracked yet. We want to experiment, we want to hear what is going on in different jurisdictions, think about what we can learn, what can we maybe do together. And it's just a really nice, different way of doing government, doing even international diplomacy. And as you've suggested there, New Zealand is really striding out, taking some big experimental approaches in this. And with their wellbeing budget that they brought down in May, they're basically saying to get budget revenue and to get money for different departmental activities, all departments, whether it's the Defence Department or the Housing Department or the Police Department or the Education Department, have to align their plans and their spending priorities with delivering across 5 different goals that make up the vision for a wellbeing economy in New Zealand. And there are things like a low carbon economy, making the most of technology, delivering on supporting Maori communities and mental health. Those sorts of goals are what government departments are being expected to attend to. And we're yet to see, it's new, they're quite humble about how this will go in the first year. It's quite a shift in spending. But what's really exciting is it's grounded in something that New Zealand Treasury has been working on for a while, called the Living Standards Framework. So they've got some pretty rigorous plans and frameworks, and so really research beyond this, but we're yet to see how it really translates into people's lives. That's where we'll have to take a watching brief for the next couple of years, actually, because these things take time. It's really about, you know, turning a ship around, not just, you know, tweaking around the margins anymore.
And here in Scotland, I mean, obviously most of our viewers are more concerned about Scotland than what's happening in New Zealand. So what is happening in Scotland on this front?
So one of the most exciting developments that happened relatively quietly, it made the news a little bit, but was relatively quiet back in June, was when Scottish Enterprise, you know, a big enterprise agency that has as its raison d'etre to support the growth of businesses, they said we are going to shift how we decide which businesses or potential prospective businesses to support. In the past, we've picked them by their growth potential. Now, we're going to choose to come in and support businesses depending on if they've got potential to deliver decent work, to address human rights issues, to address inequality, deliver on well-being agendas. Again, yet to see how this plays out, but this is a sort of shift in government priority and then shift in, I guess, investment that we need to be undertaking if we're serious about transforming the economy. So I'm really excited about watching the ripple effects of that decision flowing through over the next years to see, can this actually change the economic ecosystem? Can it change the sort of businesses that people are employed by in Scotland, that people shop in, that people invest in even? It has the potential to really bring us a different makeup in the economic system in Scotland. So they're the sort of changes that we need to be taking very seriously.
Now, this
presumably wouldn't just be a political activity. This is something that citizens will need to get involved in. So how can citizens get involved in helping to create this well-being economy in Scotland?
Yeah, citizens are really important, particularly in just building the demand for this sort of shift. We know that in Scotland there's a lot of deliberative conversations, there's citizens' assemblies, there's all the sorts of discussions on social media and in town halls. And if people are talking about these priorities in those spaces, then politicians will start to listen. So it does matter, people really shouting about this and saying this is the sort of Scotland that we want, these are the sort of shifts that we need, these are sort of the conversations that need to be had. People also, if they've got the means, can shift their spending, think about where is their investment. Are they investing in companies that are making their money from fossil fuels, or are they supporting more cooperative, socially orientated businesses? Those sorts of questions. But ultimately, I think it's about closing that gap between those conversations that people are having around their kitchen table, at the pub, standing alongside the lines of a footy match, and where people really understand what it is that matters most to them, translating that up to an economy that's more aligned with that. It has once been said, why have we got an economic system that none of us as individuals actually want? And I think what we need to do is really close that gap and think about what sort of economy, what sort of country do we need for people today and in the future to have good lives. And then we need to redesign the economy in service of that. These are the sort of big challenges and big discussions that a wellbeing economy frame demands that we ask.
Now, over the kind of longer term, is this going to affect things like taxation and all those kind of big government
Oh yeah,
issues?
there's lots of levers, I guess, that governments can pull in order to inculcate and cultivate the sort of shift in the economic system that this requires, and tax is a really good example of that. I mean, if you think about it, or the way I think about it, there are three reasons for tax. One is to raise revenue, to do collective investment, our schools, our education system, that sort of thing. It's also to do a bit of redistribution, and it's also to send incentives and signals of the sort of business behaviour that we need. So across the board, all those objectives of the tax system really need to be aligned with the objective of a wellbeing economy. But even that middle one, this idea of redistributing, so taking from those who have got most wealth and funneling it back through various complicated welfare mechanisms to those who have very little, even that's a sign of failure. In a wellbeing economy, we wouldn't need to redistribute so much because we'd have an economic system that did much more of the heavy lifting. And so we could imagine perhaps a very different tax system that taxed things like extremes of wealth or extreme levels of ownership of land, for example, or tax environmental pollution, where we're sitting here with an airport just down the side of the road. I mean, much more tax on air passenger tax, for example, is a good example, or extraction from our land or polluting. They're the sort of discussions and sort of shifts in the tax system that we need to be exploring.
Okay, and just finally, these three countries, New Zealand, Iceland and Scotland, are all led by relatively young women, which is fairly unusual still, sadly, in global political terms. To what extent would you say that this well-being economy idea is a feminist idea?
It's got its roots in feminist economics. I mean, feminist economics scholars have for decades been saying, one, how we do the economy is wrong, but two, the measure of progress that we've defaulted to for many decades, gross domestic product, doesn't take account of so much important activity that's done in the home and in the communities, largely by women. So it ignores the care economy. So feminists have got a long track record of really critiquing the economic system that we have and how it doesn't support women. But perhaps even worse than not supporting women, the economic system so often is on the backs of poor women around the world. I mean, you only have to look at global supply chains and see that it is women who are at the very, very margins of those and most exploited. So it's deeply a feminist issue. But I also think there's something also, and I don't want to essentialise women here, but there is something about the more collaborative tendency. And I think the fact that it is three women leaders who are linking arms and collaborating through the Wellbeing Economy Governments Partnership is an example of that. That said, some of the other governments that would be brilliant to bring on board to WeGo are led by men, so we wouldn't want to shut them out. Costa Rica, Finland, for example, there's some really cool heads of state there, and we can't have this, we need to have them around the table as well, because some really interesting work going on in those countries too.
Well, Catherine, all the best. I mean, it sounds like such a fascinating idea.
Thanks,
I'm sure
Kenny.
we could talk more, and I hope we will.
Brilliant to see you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Bye. And that was our coverage of SNP 19 at the event complex in Aberdeen. We'd like to thank everybody who was involved. All the staff at the venue were a great help, even though it's a brand new building and some of our technical issues were quite serious. We'd also like to thank everyone in the SNP press team, especially young Callum, who was a great help to us. And most especially, we'd like to thank all the people who came and spoke to us that you've heard from. We had Valentina Cervera-Clavel, Ross Clark and Jack O'Neill on Sunday on our youth-themed Full Scottish. We have also spoken to Stuart Hosey MP, Drew Hendry MP, Marion Fellows MP, Pete Wishart MP, Emma Harper MSP, Shona Robeson MSP. We spoke to Delith Jewell AM from Plaid Cymru. We spoke to Lorena Lopez de la Calle from the EFA. We also spoke to Jordan Linden from YSI, Tomas Carruthers from Project Heather, and Dr. Catherine Trebek from the Wellbeing Economics Alliance. We'd like to thank them all and everyone else at conference. It really was a really fun experience, and we hope to be back next time. So thank you for joining us. This has been the SNP 19 coverage from Broadcasting Scotland.